Welcome back to B2B Inspired. Today I have the immense pleasure of talking to Carolyn Schofield. Carolyn is the creative force behind some of New Zealand's most loved advertising, including the 4 Legs Good Trustpower ad, the story of a man and his dog that captured the nation's heart and won awards. Even more impressive, it was just her and a creative director crafting high production TV commercials that beat the bigger budget competitors. Carolyn now runs two ventures, Food Marketing NZ and Brand Science NZ. And Carolyn is a champion of emotional storytelling and marketing effectiveness. And that's what I'm really keen to dive into today. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Freya.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. Now, I've come to hear you talk twice now, once at the Moped Awards and then once at our local Daybreak Festival here in Tauranga. And I purposefully made a point of coming to see you because every time I have a conversation with you, I feel like I get a masterclass in marketing. So if you get the opportunity, please go and see Carolyn speak, especially on the topic of marketing effectiveness. What is marketing effectiveness and how would you define it?
Well, that's a big question to start off with. Freya. Okay, I think we need to take a step back, possibly from that question and go a few steps back into what the role of marketing actually is within an organisation and how that's changed and how perhaps the perception of marketing is not what it should be in a lot of organisations. Marketing fundamentally should be your key business driver. Marketing should be all about driving whatever the overall business or organisational objectives are. But over the years, and particularly in the climate we're in at the moment, where everyone's looking very short term and things, in a lot of organisations, I think there's still a fundamental misunderstanding about what marketing's role is. And that's where we come up against this cliche of marketing being referred to as the colouring in team. So in a lot of people who don't really understand marketing, you still got that perception that marketing is about doing the ads, and about the actual communications side, whereas it isn't. Marketing should be at the heart of the business and should be driving all of the business objectives. So fundamentally, marketing effectiveness is about achieving business objectives.
Right, excellent. So it's a profit engine and not a cost centre.
It is a profit engine. It absolutely should be viewed as a profit engine, and it should be viewed, I believe, as a fundamental business overhead. Mm-hmm. In the same way that your finance department are and your IT department are, it's an essential cost of doing business. Mm-hmm. But often, as you say, it's not viewed that way. It's looked at as a net cost rather than a fundamental essential to the overall business operations.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think is driving that? How do you think marketers have got ourselves into this corner?
Yeah, I think there's like everything in life, there's a complex interplay of factors there. First of all, there's a lot of, more and more, it seems to be getting better, not worse, the short-termism in businesses and the need to see immediate results. And this has been going on over the last 10, 15 years, and very much actually since digital channels have been so important a part of our marketing mix, where businesses have been putting pressure on their marketing teams, on their retail teams, whatever, to achieve results in shorter and shorter timescales. So it used to be that maybe the results of what you were doing were being measured over maybe 6 months or a year. Now it's not. Week on week, some people are being measured. So that is changing. In a lot of organizations, it means they're so focused on the short term that they're not looking at the long term. And the most powerful effects of marketing or effective marketing happen over the long term. So a lot of organisations have lost sight of that in their constant scrabble to achieve next week's results or next month's results. I also think, not to be critical of my fellow marketers, we're in a very hard position a lot of the time, but I think there are a lot of people. Well, just again to take a step back, marketing is one of those roles that everyone thinks they can do. We've all been there in a company or an organization where other parts of the business believe they can do marketing's job just as well as the marketers can, because, hey, it's just common sense, isn't it? Well, it isn't just common sense. But as a result of that attitude, you do have a lot of people in marketing who've learnt on the job, and that's brilliant. There's nothing that beats learning on the job. But at the same time, there is a lot of work, of research, of big brains around the world who have been analysing the root of what makes, marketing effective. And as a result, I think that there are still quite a lot of people in quite senior marketing roles who perhaps aren't aware of all of the work. It's becoming better known. It's becoming more widespread over time. But there's a lot of people in marketing roles who themselves perhaps are either, behind the times in their knowledge or are unaware that there are now rules of marketing, and it's a profession, and you need to learn it, just like your CFO or your chief engineer or your head of IT does. Mm-hmm. It's not actually just a skill that you can just assimilate. You need to be trained in it. Mm-hmm. And I think in some ways marketers have done ourselves a disservice and have helped to sort of almost reinforce those views that, hey, anyone can do it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And all of these things together have led to marketing perhaps being in a bit of a difficult position in many organizations. Not all, of course, but in many organizations.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think the last year has seen marketing teams get a little bit smaller as well. So tight resources.
Absolutely.
So we've all got to make our budgets stretch.
We
right?
do.
I think there's many people who are in a situation where every dollar counts.
Yes.
And that's why marketing effectiveness just becomes so important. And like
Absolutely.
you say, the rules of marketing and the principles of marketing. Then I'm hoping to talk to you a little bit today about, in the context of the Trustpower advert that was so favorable in 2022. It won the nation's favorite ad, and many people will recognize it, I think. So can you tell me a little bit about that journey and how that started?
Yeah, well, I was at Trustpower for 10 years nearly. And if we go back to the beginning of my time at Trustpower, I joined Trustpower at a time when Trustpower as an organisation was undergoing some radical changes. It had very big ambitions. So Trustpower had come out of what had been the Regional Power Board at the time of deregulation of the industry. And it was still, when I came on board, it had been, there as the major retailer in, this area of New Zealand, Tauranga and the Bay of Plenty for many years, not really operating in the big cities, or not really known as a retailer in the big cities, but kind of going along, doing its thing well. When I joined, there was actually a lot of ambition in the company, because a few years previous to me joining, the company had decided to get into telecommunications as well as electricity. Some very smart people at the company had identified this opportunity for bringing together multiple services. Interestingly, it had been tried by various people across the world, and quite a few big companies had failed trying to do it. But we were at a particular point in time in New Zealand where the fibre rollout was happening. And so a lot of people were going to be reviewing their telecoms providers and having changes in that. And as I said, there were some very smart people at the company who recognised this. So I came in when the company was looking to change, was looking to reposition the brand completely, and was looking to grow significantly. Was going to start marketing again, trying to acquire customers in the metros, in Auckland, Wellington in particular. So it was a really pivotal time in the company's growth. But we still had no budgets. We had big ambitions to grow and to become a serious player, both in the telco market as well as the electricity market. But we still kind of had the regional electricity provider budget. So we had to be smart about what we were going to do, because we were going to be competing with Vodafone and well, it was still Telecom 10 years ago, but Vodafone and Spark, and they're, hundreds of millions of dollars on advertising spend. We were going to be competing for the same customers as them. So we were in a position where we were going to be forced to be smart about what we did, because we couldn't rely on spend alone to get us to where we wanted to be. So kind of that meant that we always were looking for insight, we were looking for data constantly to guide us in what we were doing. And we were looking to make decisions very much based on insight in everything we did. And I mean, the first stage, I've gone a long way back here.
It's context setting, and it's really important.
But one of the principles that we used, and there were lots of others along the way in terms of positioning, in terms of our use of research, all of that. But when it actually came to advertising, there is a lot of evidence out there, as you referred to in what you said at the beginning, Freya, a lot of evidence that emotional advertising is far more effective than rational advertising. And this all comes back down to the way the brain works. We are emotional creatures. We have these two pathways of thinking in our brains, the system 1 brain and the system 2 brain, and one of which is really emotional and wants to make decisions, spontaneously and quickly, and the other, which is our logical brain. But our brains don't like using the logical brain. It's hard work thinking things through logically. So our brains will always, when they can, revert to system 1 decision making, and system 1 decision making is driven by emotion. So there's so much evidence now that when you look at all of the people who are looking at creative effectiveness and analysing creative effectiveness, it's when you tap into those deep human needs and that deep understanding of how the human brain works. What humans respond to, they respond to stories. We've told stories for millennia, for as long as there have been humans, we've told stories. So the brain is wired to respond to stories, and it's wired to respond to emotion. And if we can bring that storytelling and that emotion into what we're doing, even when we're selling, a boring product like electricity or some industrial widget or whatever it is, if we can find a way to bring stories and emotion in, that's what people remember. That's what gets salience. That's what gets your brand front of mind in people's brains. And that is why that type of advertising, certainly at a brand level, of course, there's a place for logical advertising too, to do a different function. But at the brand level, it's those emotional stories that really, really work. So we always had a history from right back when I joined Trustpower. We actually did 8 or 9 full production TVCs during my time there. We did a lot of creative work when I was there. And going right back to the beginning, we'd always used emotional stories. So people probably won't remember, but the very first TV ad I did when I joined Trustpower was the story of one of our customer service staff. The main character was one of the customer service staff, and it was called Drive to Work, and it was her story of her driving to work one day, including things like rescuing ducklings from the road and things on her way, which was all about the service, Trustpower service. We then went through a whole series. Well, we did a series of 3 ads that some people might remember, with 2 characters, Captain Energy and Broadband Girl. So it was the story of 2 cosplayers who met at a cosplay convention. His character was Captain Energy, hers was Broadband Girl. And it was their love story over 3 different ads.
Amazing. I'm not from New Zealand originally, so I'd like to hear these stories. It's just wonderful. I'll have to go and look them up.
So I can send you links. You won't find them online because Trustpower as a company doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately. So they're quite hard to find. But I can send them to you if you're interested. But the idea of selling electricity and telco services through a couple of cosplay characters was, it was all about finding a device to use to tell stories, and also bringing in there's effectiveness work that shows that using characters and repeat characters, which a lot of people are now using when we look at the most successful advertising, the most well-known advertising in New Zealand, this idea that brand characters can make your advertising more effective is now being well understood by a lot of advertisers in New Zealand, as you'll see, like with some of the banks who've got their their recurring stories of their characters. Even some of the other electricity companies now are using that recurring character device. So
and that's
we used
codification, isn't it?
Well, it's part of codification. Yeah, they become part of your brand code. They become that recognizable part of your brand. And so we used our characters for a while, but then again we had data saying that they'd reached the end of their natural life. So we didn't just spontaneously make the decision to stop using them because we were bored of them. We had data from our research which was saying they've served a very important purpose, they've done well, but now there's something new that people want to hear, and a slightly new creative direction might be required in order to shift to the next place that the brand needs to be. So we then came into the sort of the last phase of Trustpower, where we were using, the meant to be together concept, which was still about the idea of bundling power and broadband. But we were finding stories. We were looking for stories of people, things that were meant to be together. So the first one we did was the story of a couple. Well, they'd been childhood sweethearts, and then meet again, in later on in life, and we're always meant to be together, and don't quite ride off into the sunset, but that kind of thing. So we did that, and that went down very well. And then the dog ad was our second in using that idea of meant to be together. So we decided, okay, we've done the boy-girl relationship. What can we use next to tell a meant to be together story?
And it was just yourself and a creative director. You didn't have a big creative team working at this.
We didn't have big creative teams. The way we worked at Trustpower, the whole of my time at Trustpower, we didn't work with big agencies in any of my time at Trustpower. We basically worked with one creative director and then the art director who works with him. And that was it. So no big agency, no big teams of planners, suits, strategists, whatever, no, ECDs, CDs, multiple creative teams. It was really just one creative director, Daniel. And then we'd work really closely, but we could work really efficiently as well. And so the whole way we worked, when we were looking at a new TVC, it might be that at the beginning of the process, Daniel would come up with 20 different ideas, and they may have been no more than, one line, which was a scenario. But then the way we worked, we could go through all of those and go, yeah, there's something in there, and then start to explore it.
So it's a collaborative creative process.
It was a collaborative creative process, and where we were slightly different to the sort of more standard structured way of working is we tended to bring in the director quite early on in the process as well. So very often, if you're working in a traditional manner with a large agency, when you actually get the production company on board, the director will be presented with a finalized script, storyboards that have been signed off, everything set in stone, and it's purely the director's job to create what's already been determined and signed off. We'd also bring our director in quite early in the process to be able to talk about, is this going to work? How could we do this? How could we do this within budget? So it was quite a collaborative process, but with myself and the creative that I worked with, and then sort of the producer and director as well.
And you had access to a lot of data because it was an energy company, so all that information is publicly available. So what would you say to marketers who need access to data, who are not able to get all of that at their fingertips, or which resources would you lean into?
Well, it's really hard. I mean, when it comes down to, as you say, in the electricity sector, you're a bit spoiled in that, certainly in terms of your market share, which is a fundamental, metric that everyone really needs needs to know, because it can drive a lot of the decisions you make about your effectiveness, and is a fundamental metric to measure the effects of what you're doing. In the electricity company, in the electricity industry in New Zealand, you have market share data to 2 decimal points that's refreshed on a monthly basis by the Electricity Authority. So most marketers would kill for that kind of level of data about not just their market share, but every single competitor's market share too. So that was we were a little bit spoiled, and it wasn't just that. You have a lot of data about your individual customer behavior. Clearly, we know what services they're using, how much they're using, when they're using it. So you have a lot of usage data as well that a lot of other marketers don't have. But I think the first point is, it doesn't have to be perfect. We had all of this data available. It's simply not realistic for a lot of companies to have that sort of data. Don't let that hold you back, because sometimes people will go, so, people, naturally go, but I don't have any of that. What can I do? Don't get hung up on what you don't have is the starting point. The next best thing is to think about, what you do have. So you may not have that detailed market share data. If you can afford it, the things like brand tracking data is absolutely essential. I'd say any company that can possibly afford it, you can carry out your own brand. You can carry out brand tracking data yourselves. Now, it used to be quite expensive to do continuous brand tracking. We used to sort of spend a significant amount on all of our brand tracking at Trustpower. But now it's actually much more accessible. And for a start, if you can't do continuous, can you do a snapshot once a year? Because for most of us, in most of the sectors we work in, things like brand metrics don't change that much over time. So lovely as it is to have monthly figures and maybe to be able to correlate things to specific activities you've been undertaking, for a lot of companies, actually having a snapshot once a year is better than nothing at all. And then there are all of those providers. There are people providing much more accessible, much more cost-effective. Am I allowed to mention other companies?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
People like Tracksuit. I mean, Tracksuit have actually revolutionised brand tracking and made it so accessible for far more companies who can't spend 6-figure sums on it, but can spend 15,000-20,000 a year on it. They've made that accessible. There are other ways as well of you can do it yourself. If you're reasonably competent, there are ways now. There are online companies where one of the problems with doing any sort of research used to be access to panels. You had to go through a research agency to get access to panels. There are now companies that have built panels, including in New Zealand, that you can access directly through their database and set up studies directly for them. I've been using one of them to do research for a couple of clients recently, and so having access to a panel like that, if you've got someone in your team who is reasonably competent about structuring surveys or talking to people. I mean, that's basically what qualitative research is. It's just talking to people. And you can do this yourself as well for a few $1,000s. You can do a quantitative study, maybe to get brand metric data, or do a qualitative study talking to. I've just completed a study where I've done 20 qualitative interviews for one of my clients. Which would have been completely out of reach a few years ago. It would have cost tens of thousands of dollars potentially to do that. I was able to do it for, a very few $1,000s through using some of this technology and some of these companies that are out there, making, the tracking, making other forms of research more accessible. And of course, I mean, I haven't done this myself, but as everything comes back to AI at the moment, doesn't it? But one potential massive benefit of AI, I think, for marketers is this whole, and this is controversial, some people throw their hands up in horror and go, no, you have to talk to real people. But there are all of these companies that are working on, synthetic research panels where you're using AI. Rather than actually going out and talking to people, which again makes it much more accessible. And for me as a marketer, if I can have an app that I open on my desktop that's my synthetic customer or my synthetic customer panel, who I can sit there and talk to all day, and go, do you like this ad? Do you like this new product offer? Do you like this? What should we do here? It may not be perfect, and it may not be perfect, but certainly for those marketers who can't afford to get the perfect, if I can have something that is maybe 80% of what I could have got through traditional methods, for me, that still puts me way ahead of where I would have been doing nothing.
Yes, and it's one of the tenets of marketing effectiveness from Mark Ritson as well, isn't it? Number one, just enough research.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Enough to make the decision.
And that enough is different for different people. But it's kind of, So for all of those companies out there who perhaps don't have access to hundreds of thousands of dollars of research budgets, our technology is actually enabling this. And fundamentally, just go and talk to people. If you can't afford, if you're a small company, if you can't afford a research agency, just go and talk to your customers.
Absolutely.
It doesn't have to cost lots of money, and just talking to people is the best thing you can do as a start. Yes, we can get terribly complicated, with massive research studies, with all kinds of analysis. But if that's not right for you and your company, start in a place you can still make a start, because still any data, any insight is going to be better than none at all.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with you, and I've definitely fallen into the trap of too much data as well. I love research.
Exactly.
I'm like you in the terms of want to have all of the science and all of the data.
Well, I do. I've got science education, so my brain goes, give me the data Absolutely. On which to make my decisions. But at the end of the day, it doesn't have to be perfect. You can still get some. The example the other day, well, it was a few weeks ago, I was in the supermarket and I saw a young guy pick up one of my client's products on the shelf and have a look. And he was reading the label of it. And so I just went up to him and I said, please don't call the police. Can I talk to you? Do you mind if I talk to you? And he didn't think I was some kind of. I obviously convinced him I wasn't some kind of crazy person who he needed to be saved from. But he was happy to talk to me. I asked him, why that product? Why? What are you doing? What are you looking for in the labels? What are you reading? Would you mind telling me why you're standing there looking at the packaging and reading it right now? That was insight. His answers, his reasons as to what he was doing, that was insight. It didn't take a massive research study costing lots of money to get a data point. Okay, one data point. That's all it was, one data point. But it was still interesting, and it still gave me insight into that customer's decision-making.
And I bet you it wasn't features and benefits that drew him in, right?
No, it wasn't. There were some specific things he was looking for.
Yeah, exactly. And I think so many marketers might fall into that trap as well, especially in B2B. It's so easy to fall back onto the features and benefits and talking about those primarily. Coming back to your earlier point around our rational decision-making brain and our emotive decision-making brain. And we always like to say at Blue Ocean that it's not a business that signs a check, it's a person that signs a check.
Absolutely.
I think it's very easy for, especially when we feel like we're selling to a very technical audience, like CTOs or people who we assume will be making very rational decisions. And that's fundamentally incorrect, isn't it?
Well, it is. And it all comes back to, again, where does good marketing start? Regardless of what sector we're talking about, regardless of whether you're selling, bread or IT components. Where does it start? It should always start from understanding your customers. And again, we invested a lot in Trustpower in our customers, in understanding our customers, in really understanding our customer needs, and then building a brand positioning and brand attributes that always referred back to what those core customer needs were.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same regardless of what you're selling.
Mm-hmm.
Understand those customer needs and make that your starting point. And very often, whether it's in the consumer market or the business market, there will be needs that are actually quite emotional because, as you say, these people, they're people. Mm-hmm. They're not automata. They're not AI humanoids. They are people still. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. At the moment, making these decisions. And very often they will have... there will be practical needs. Yes, of course, there are practical needs, particularly maybe in technical sectors. But those practical needs may, if you go to a deeper level, there may be emotional needs at sort of a layer beneath those practical needs. So maybe you have a practical need for reliability for whatever widget it is that you're producing. But the next layer of needs is that you don't want your staff constantly being stressed because there are problems with something that's not reliable.
Yes. And we call that moving up the benefit ladder, don't we?
Absolutely.
So you can start with your pain points, and then you can even map it out quite quickly and quite relatively easily by thinking of it in terms of a ladder.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So starting with what are those practical benefits? Mm-hmm. So what are those product benefits? And then moving up into, okay, so those are the actual functional benefits. Well, the functional features. So the starting point is those more functional features. Yes. Then, okay, so what are the functional benefits? And then you can start looking, regardless of what you're talking about, what you're selling, you can then start going, okay, so what emotional benefits do those functional benefits lead to? Mm-hmm. And they'll still be there, even as you say in B2B and even in a very technical sector. They'll be there. And as you say, people are people. Mm. They are people running these businesses. And for every, multinational or massive corporate, we know there's far more businesses at a much lower level, which are still owner operated, where people are personally invested in it. And certainly that whole, owner operator layer, which I work with a lot, mm-hmm. Their businesses are everything, because business and personal are all mixed in one, because their businesses are their lives. Mm-hmm. And there is no separation really between the business and the person. So everything comes back to the people involved, mm-hmm. not just the functional attributes of what it is you're marketing.
Mm. So what would you say are the core tenets of an effective marketing campaign? If you were to list a couple, how would you run it through a filter? You're a marketer and you've created a campaign. What would be a checklist for you?
Okay, well, the starting point is this based on customer need? Mm-hmm. Do I understand what my customer needs are? And is whatever I'm doing here speaking to meeting those customer needs? That is so much at the heart of everything that you're doing. And there's that phrase, you are not your customers. A lot of people think they understand their customers. A lot of businesses think they understand their customers. But take that step back always and go, is this coming from me? Is this coming from my colleague? Is this coming from the CEO? Or is this actually coming from what we know about our customers? So that's so fundamental. And I find that a lot in the work I'm doing. I work with quite a lot of, owner-operator food businesses mm-hmm. at the moment. A lot of them that have been startups, and they've been started up by lovely, lovely people who have started them because they're passionate about a particular type of food, mm-hmm. and they want to share a particular type of food with the world. Uh-huh. And there's a whole raft of stories behind that. They've all got their differently, but they're passionate about what they do. But that passion can blinker them, because they have their reasons why they're passionate about that. But the reason why customers are actually buying their product might be something completely different. Mm-hmm. to what they think. So and that can come as quite a surprise mm-hmm. to them mm-hmm. at times.
Yeah, you need to get out of the office
and
sometimes.
They need
to
get out of the office and understand your actual everyday buyers, not just you and your friends and family who probably think the same way that you do. Mm-hmm. So that is fundamental, that customer insight, understanding customer needs, is crucial to any marketing campaign. You then sort of get into the more, some of the amazing research that's been done over the last 10 or 15 years. Another principle that we absolutely used at Trustpower all along is that need to invest in brand.
Yes.
So there's the whole lot of data and research, particularly the best well known is the Binet and Fields research, which if you haven't read, anyone who's in marketing should be aware of all the research they've done over the last nearly 15 years since the long and the short of it was first produced. They clearly established this need to invest in at the brand level as well as at the short-term sales level. So at the beginning, we were talking a bit about marketing becoming short-term and more short-term. That still is happening, but the Binet and Field research shows very clearly that's completely the wrong thing to do, and that you will be more effective over the long term by investing in brand as well as having your short-term activations. And we all need this. We all need the sales today and tomorrow as well as the sales in a year's time. Otherwise, our businesses will fail if we all sit there twiddling our thumbs going, just wait for my long-term stuff to work. It'll work in a year's time. If there's going to be no sales in the next year, we're all going to be out of jobs because the company is not going to still be there to work for. So we have to have that short-term stuff to drive the immediate sales happening as well. But you have to be investing at the brand level as well. And that's where the emotional advertising that we were talking about really comes in, because what it does, it creates those memory structures, it creates salience, it keeps your brand front of mind, so that when people are in the buying situation, your brand is front of mind, which is actually even more important in a business-to-business context in some ways than in a consumer context, because we know for many business-to-business products, you do have a very long buying cycle. It's not like going into the supermarket and going, I'll pick up a bar of chocolate as a spontaneous purchase. We understand, businesses do have long buying cycles. They may have complex groups of people, decision makers involved. And there's that statistic that, Blue Ocean will know very, very well about, that in the B2B world, only 5% of your potential market is actually at a point of making a purchase or looking into making a purchase at any one time. You need to be marketing as much as that 95%. As well as that 5%, so that when one of that 95% does move to be one of those 5% that's in the buying situation, your brand is the first one that they pick up the phone to talk to.
Absolutely. And we see it a lot with companies that have been around, 60, 100 years.
Yes.
And now we're they may have had a very, very good long run of things. And now the economy is a little bit shaky. There are new competitors entering the market. There are new challenges that businesses have to face.
Yes.
And marketing can help to overcome some of those challenges.
Absolutely. Yeah. So make sure you're structuring your whole approach to marketing with the right balance of brand work, which will work in the long term. Although it's actually been shown as well that brand marketing is effective in the short term, but short-term activation marketing isn't effective in the long term. So it will help to produce short-term results as well. But it'll amplify the effectiveness of what you're doing to drive those sales today, as well as building up potential sales in the future. So that's another core thing. And be clear what your objectives are is another core thing. Yes. It's amazing how often, marketing teams are off doing things and they actually have never defined what the objective really is of what they're doing. Now, marketing should always be referring back to what are the business objectives. And if you can't show the link between what you're doing and business objectives, maybe think again about why you're doing what you're doing. I think at Trustpower we had, as I said, we didn't have massive budgets. So we had to be very focused on why we were doing things and how what we were doing would help to achieve those overall business objectives. So marketing should always be absolutely linked into those business objectives. And if you can't work down from, our business objectives are this revenue growth, this customer number growth, this profitability growth, then think about how you're actually approaching your marketing planning. So that's really, really essential. And sometimes it's hard. And as we've been talking about, particularly when it comes to justifying what you're doing more at a brand level, you cannot go to your CFO and say, give me the budget to do this brand level advertising campaign, and I can guarantee that I will get a market share rise of 3% in the next 6 months. Maybe some of your digital advertising, you can say, okay, we will do this. I project that we will get X number of sales directly from this activity. The brand level stuff, you can't do that. So you do need to have the trust of your team in-house that what you're doing, you may not be able to say this. I never once at Trustpower could say this TV budget is actually going to give this dollar return specifically, because it doesn't work that way anyway. Everything interplays. But they understood, the teams I was working with understood that everything I was doing was then making the results of what we were doing short term better. And so overall, having that, we actually took quite a holistic view to measuring the effectiveness. And so we were looking at market share growth, customer number growth of services, because we were a multi-service provider, MPV, so customer profitability metrics. But we were looking at them quite holistically as a result of all of our marketing activities, rather than trying to go, well, this sales focused campaign has produced these results, this TV ad has produced these results, these radio ads have produced these results. We didn't look at it this way. We looked at it overall, because there was that understanding that everything links together and everything compounds.
Yes.
And so it's those overall results you need to be looking at. So yeah, you need those clear objectives. And then you need to understand what actually, going back to, talking about effective marketing, you need to understand about media and creative. So what, because I guess at any point you can fail. That's the thing. We were talking a minute ago about Binnett and Field's work and this idea you need to invest in brand and activation. And they have this basic rule of thumb that a lot of people will be aware of, that you should have 60% of your budget in brand and 40% in activation. Now that varies for different companies and different times, different types of companies. It's much more sophisticated than that, but that's the basic rule of thumb. You can't just take your advertising budget and do 60-40 and go, okay, I'm done. If your product isn't good, if your pricing's wrong, if your creative is poor, you still won't get anywhere. So you have to, if you make the wrong media choices. So you still need to have those good old skills of understanding media or working with people who do, and understanding creative effectiveness or working with people who do. Because you have to have everything to get the best results. You need everything, all those different links in the chain to come together.
Almost like you need to have so much internal buy-in as much as you have external buy-in with your product, right? So making sure that you have people, making sure that you're integrated and well socialized within the business and connected well to product, and just as much to sales.
Absolutely. So product is part of marketing, but somehow in a lot of organizations it seems to have got separated, I think, in a lot of organizations these days. You have the product team, and again, this comes back to marketing being positioned internally as the colouring in team, because things like product have perhaps sometimes been separated off into their own team that isn't actually the marketing team. But if you don't have that link between the product team and the insights, assuming you've got, an insights function or marketers who are passionate about insights, then, you've got to have that connection between product and insights, because otherwise product might run off and do things that are brilliant at one level. But again, they're not meeting the customer needs.
And sales too as well, right? So connecting through from product through to marketing through to sales. What would you say about the link between sales and marketing? How should that look in when you're trying to create and build effectiveness?
Again, it's collaboration, isn't it? Like everyone needs to work together. So marketing needs to understand, what the key issues for sales are. But sales will also kind of need some education into marketing as well, and understand maybe this link between the long and the short term as well. Sales, they're sales guys. They're about making the sales today, tomorrow. So that's what they want. They want you to throw your whole budget into things that are going to make their job easier. So again, there's internal education to do, so that everyone needs to understand why. It's so much easier if everyone understands why you're doing what you're doing, and if you talk to people and explain why you're doing things. So I know a lot of companies still struggle against things being siloed, but if you can start to break out of that silo, and again, you don't need to necessarily completely restructure your company. Just talk to people. Pop down. I used to, at Trustpower, very often, it wasn't every time, but when we did a new brand level TVC, I tried often that the first people who got to see it were the sales teams. So I'd often go and present it down on the sales floor. They'd get off the phones for 5 minutes, and I'd go down to the sales floor. And often they were the first people who got to see things like new big brand campaigns. Because they could see it, I could talk to them about it, I could explain why I was doing this TVC with a 3-legged dog in that didn't really seem to have anything about electricity in it, rather than just flashing, call us now.
Yep.
I could explain that to them.
Yes.
And that got their buy-in.
So it's simple tactics, right?
Simple tactics.
Simple communication.
Simple communication. Talk to people when you meet them, when you're making a cup of coffee. Going, I'm doing this. You might like to know about it.
Be the connector. I like that.
Be a connector. Yeah.
I'm going to put you on the spot here.
Oh, no.
I'm going to ask you what your favourite campaign is running right now in New Zealand, out in the world, for all of the reasons that we've just talked about. What if you could take a peek behind it, you would hazard a guess that they were being quite effective?
Yeah. Well, there are a lot. I always get to judge some of the marketing awards, so I actually get to peek under the bonnet of some of these campaigns sometimes by reading awards entries. In terms of it's a lot of the very well-known ones are very well-known at the moment and have been doing well because they've been using these principles. So things like the Tina from Turner's campaign has been phenomenally successful for them, and that's because they've applied principles of effectiveness at every stage of what they're doing there. They understood exactly what they were trying to achieve through it. They've over time they've used the same approach, and that's an example. Yes, it's not a weepy like my 3-legged dog, but it's funny, it's amusing. People love the character of Tina, so that works over time. And then you've got things like, again, it's a cliche, but the ANZ campaign with the Sharma family, they've been using it over years and years and years now. And keeping on evolving it. Again, they've been applying principles, certainly of creative effectiveness and brand building effectiveness to everything they do. In that, so they're two examples, and they're always up there on the, and they represent another principle, which is, it used to be kind of, if you were a marketers and agencies got bored of creative. And, it would be like, and you say, oh, well, people can only see your ad a certain number of times, and then it's done its dash and it's not effective anymore, and you need to do something new. That really came more from, I think, agencies, wanting to make more money by doing new creative, and marketers getting bored and wanting to do new stuff too. But again, there's so much evidence out there that people don't get bored of good creative. If it's telling the right stories, if it's coming from the right customer needs, if it's communicating the right things about the brand, and it's executed well, then creative wear out is a bit of a myth. And so there's a lot, if you look at a lot of the advertising that's done well in New Zealand over the last few years, they've been using those principles, like Tina, like the Sharma family, like Contact, back to the electricity market with little George and her family. People don't Amy and Ben for ASB as well with the banks. People don't get bored if it's good creative. And we saw that. I mean, if Trustpower hadn't been bought by Mercury, we could still be using that ad now.
Yes.
You know, it was filmed at the end of 2021, went live at the very end of 2021. 4 years later, there's a good chance we would still be using that ad. Mm-hmm. Because people don't get bored. And certainly it ran for about 18 months until we had the merger with Mercury. But by the end of that, I was lucky in that I had research data. We would do advertising tracking data, so I could monitor the performance of the ads. But if you are in a position where you can do advertising tracking, you know, one of the questions is always, are you getting bored of seeing this ad? Mm-hmm. And no was the answer 18 months after it was first on air. That metric for you getting bored of this ad was no higher than it was on day one.
I challenge you as well, anybody out there, to not cry within the first 2 seconds of the video. I think that I don't usually cry at movies, but yeah, the tears were flowing about 2 seconds in. So just watch these adverts and try and learn from them, because, you know, how you're feeling, right, it is probably representative of how other people feel. I mean, you are a marketer, but you're also a person. Yeah. So it can be quite interesting to use these as case studies.
It can. And we were lucky that we had the advertising tracking data, but it was, you know, that was all intentional. Yes. You know, we wanted to go one step further on with the emotional impact of that ad. Mm-hmm. And advertising tracking, when we were looking at the performance of the ad against various metrics, it blew all of the sort of standards out of the water, you know, in terms of how people were reacting to it and how it was directly changing their feelings about the brands. And that's the most important thing, really, at the end of the day. Those were brand ads. We had specific objectives in the brand perception that we were trying to either really reinforce and make stronger. And we had the data that showed that the ads specifically were increasing functional perceptions of some of the functional attributes of the brand, even though it's an ad about an old man and a three-legged dog, and it's nothing to do with electricity. It's nothing to do with our customer service. It's nothing to do with the products and pricing. And yet all of those brand attributes that were functional attributes we could show were strengthened by the advertising we were doing. So it works.
It works, yeah. Would that be the bottom line if you were to offer one takeaway for our audience today, who vary between B2B marketers, B2C marketers, and then we've got some C-suite as well. So we have a variation of different job titles. What could the takeaway be from the marketing effectiveness conversation?
Make sure your teams understand it. If you've got a team, quite often, depending on the size of the company you're working in, you may have a marketing team that's kind of evolved from people with other roles. If you have teams that perhaps are coming from a different background into marketing, or even are established teams that have grown into the roles, have the conversations with them. If you are in the C-suite, I mean, obviously not confrontationally, but get to understand their thinking, get to understand what they're applying in their work, find out where the gaps in their knowledge are and help and support them to fill in those gaps. And for smaller companies, you may not be able to afford, you know, a chief marketing officer or a head of marketing who's fully trained and fully up to date with all of this stuff. So talk to someone, talk to people who do, maybe externally. In a way that you can support in your business.
And I will put a list of all of the resources that we've talked about today, because we've talked about quite a few. But if you could list a few essential reading for anybody in marketing effectiveness, so that people can go and find this research and information. Yeah,
well, I still think, as I said, the Binnett and Field work is kind of the seminal work out there, and the first piece of work is a few years old. So their first big piece of work was called The Long and the Short of It, which established this principle of needing to invest in long-term brand building as well as short-term effectiveness, short-term activation. But they have then released multiple other pieces of work. So one about media, how this affects media choices, and another called Effectiveness in Context, which took it all a stage further into looking at those principles they'd established at the beginning, and then looking at the context of different types of businesses, sizes of businesses, maturity of businesses, and how these rules can be adapted. There are lots of other people out there. I mean, there's also Byron Sharp with his How Brands Grow is another, seminal piece of work. You may not agree with everything he says. A lot of people do disagree with things he says, but I think you should have read what he says at least, and then make your own minds up about whether you believe what he says. So he is part of the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, which is the University of South Australia's Institute of Marketing Effectiveness. So it's an academic institute of marketing effectiveness. There are other people looking at, creative effectiveness. So there are companies like System One that do a lot of advertising evaluation. So go and look at what they do. People like Grace Kite, who again does a lot of work in effectiveness. So there's a lot of people out there.
The research it's all there, isn't it?
The research is all there. And once you start, then you'll find other people, who are working in the same fields.
Amazing stuff.
Yeah.
And where can people find you, Caroline?
You can find me on LinkedIn.
Yes, LinkedIn's the best spot.
LinkedIn's the best place to find me.
Okay,
yes.
Excellent. All right, thank you so much.
Or at Food Marketing.
Marketing.
You can find the Food Marketing website as well.
Okay, wonderful stuff. Thank you so much. I feel like we could have talked and talked and talked. I think there's lots and lots to unpack about marketing effectiveness. Maybe we could do a follow-up conversation. I know that you're local. Yeah, it's wonderful. I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me, Fred.
It's a pleasure.